Welcome back. I hope the theoretical exploration that I offered you in the second video wasn't too overwhelming. The whole idea was to share with you maybe not only some of the scholarly works or overview of scholarly works, but to say that if we are not completely certain about the meaning and the role of imagination, we shouldn't be too worked up about it. Scholars over the centuries, first of all, not always agreed on what imagination is and means, and on the role of imagination in our human existence, and they had different views and different positions. But also, I wanted to encourage you to perhaps focus on a type of imagination or the type of imagination that is useful for your own thinking. In my own case, I found that the moral imagination is the tool for me with which I feel able to operate better than with a general understanding of imagination. And I have been using this concept quite a bit in my own work. This video will offer you some images, some words for our further exploration of the topic of the moral imagination. And this will be based on the engagement with the poem, and also in the background of our reflection. Perhaps we should remember the four elements that I mentioned in the definition of moral imagination by Mark Johnson. So I will recall them just in case they didn't immediately stay in our mind. I wasn't maybe very clear. So this slide summarizes the four elements that Mark Johnson in his book Moral Imagination lists. Self-knowledge about the imaginative structure of our moral understanding, including its values, limitations, and blind spots, similar knowledge of other people, the ability to imagine how various actions open to us might alter our self-identity, modify our commitments, change our relationships, and affect the lives of others. The ability to imagine and to enact transformations in our moral understanding, our character, and our behavior. Let us keep in mind this very wordy and maybe even complex definition of moral imagination when we listen to, when we read for ourselves the poem by Czeslaw Milosz. First of all, few words about Czeslaw Milosz. I give a little bit more information about him and the poem in my article on solidarity and the art of solidarity, which you will have in the handout. But just to say that Czeslaw Milosz was a Polish laureate of Nobel Prize, and he won that Nobel Prize for his poetry, including the poem we are going to consider in this session. He was born in 1911 in what is now Lithuania and died in 2004. And the last few years of his life he lived in Poland, but most of his working life and much of his poetry was composed both in France and in the United States. He was professor of literature at Berkeley University in California for many years. He had to leave Poland because of his opposition to communism, and initially he lived in France, in Paris, and then, as I mentioned, he spent much of his working life and academic life in the United States. Here in this slide I refer to some of my favorite poems by him, but also poems that trigger or mobilize imagination, including the moral imagination, when you engage with them. So if you have time, even if you have a possibility of accessing his anthology or works of poetry, but if you Google, some of these poems will, I'm sure, come up in your search. So Campo dei Fiori is the poem we will be considering now, but there are a few other poems I am listing here in this slide. Campo dei Fiori, this is really a market in Rome, in Campo dei Fiori. The poem uses the term Campo dei Fiori. The actual name is Campo di Fiori. The market still exists, and in the middle of the market, this is the Campo di Fiori at dusk. There is this huge monument, really powerful monument, which is dedicated to Giordano Bruno. It stands beautifully in the middle of the square. Giordano Bruno was a monk, a Dominican friar, born 1548, burned at the stake by Roman Inquisition in 1600s. He was a philosopher, mathematician, astronomer. He was accused of heresy, pantheism. He is considered by some as a martyr for free thought and modern scientific ideas because of his work on mathematics, geometry, cosmology, and very interesting, the art of memory. Some point out that his astronomical views were influenced by Arab astrology, Neoplatonism, and Renaissance hermeneutics, including Renaissance Hermeticism, including esoteric tradition. Others consider him as really a traitor to some of the Catholic thinking. This is a closer view of the monument, a picture taken by me, not maybe very clear, but this represents maybe some of the scenes that are mentioned in Czeslaw Miłosz's poem. This is a kind of sober, sad view on a rainy day, and I think it really expresses the mood of the poem very well, so I've included this picture here. And there is also another scene represented in the poem by Czeslaw Miłosz, and this is of the Warsaw Ghetto. The Warsaw Ghetto was the largest ghetto in the Nazi-occupied Europe during the Second World War. It was established between October and November 1940. Over 400,000 Jews crammed into an area of 1.3 square miles, large, more than half of the residents of the ghetto were sent to Treblinka extermination camp during summer 1942. Then in 1942 there was a ghetto uprising. The final battle started on the eve of Passover of April 1943. This is important because the poem alludes indirectly to that particular event of ghetto uprising. But historically, the Nazis systematically burned and blew up the ghetto buildings and murdered the inhabitants of the ghetto. Some films, like Polanski's The Pianist, capture this very well. The Nazi operation of liquidating of the ghetto officially ended with the demolition of the Great Synagogue of Warsaw on 16th of May 1943. So Czeslaw Miłosz, in his poem, brings those images of the ghetto, the uprising, into the attention of the reader or a listener of his poem. And these are just a couple of images from the museum in Washington, which captured the life of inhabitants or residents of the ghetto. So now the poem itself. I will read it to you. I'm not a great reader of poetry, but I think it may perhaps help you to relax and you don't have to engage with the text, although you are welcome to look at it. It's on this slide. It can also be downloaded via Google or some other search engine, but you are welcome to just close your eyes and listen to the poem. In Rome, on the Campo dei Fiori, baskets of olives and lemons, cobbles spattered with wine, and the wreckage of flowers. Vendors covered the trestles with roast pink fish, armfuls of dark grapes heaped on peach down. On this same square they burned Giordano Bruno. Henchmen kindled the pyre, close pressed by the mob. Before the flames had died, the taverns were full again, baskets of olives and lemons, again on the vendors' shoulders. I thought of the Campo dei Fiori in Warsaw by the Sky Carousel, one clear spring evening, to the strains of a carnival tune. The bright melody drowns the salvos from the ghetto wall, and couples were flying high in the cloudless sky. At times, wind from the burning would drift dark kites along, and riders on the carousel caught petals in mid-air. That same hot wind blew open the skirts of the girls, and the crowds were laughing on that beautiful Warsaw Sunday. Someone will read as moral that the people of Rome or Warsaw haggle, laugh, make laugh, as they pass by martyrs' pyres. Someone else will read of the passing of things human, of the oblivion born before the flames have died. But that day I thought only of the loneliness of the dying, of how when Giordano climbed to his burning, he could not find in any human tongue words for mankind who live on. Already they were back at their wine, or peddled their white starfish, baskets of olives and lemons they had shouldered to the fair, and he already distanced as if centuries had passed, while they paused just a moment for his flying in the fire. Those dying here, the lonely, forgotten by the world, our tongue becomes for them the language of an ancient planet, until, when all is legend, and many years have passed, on a new Campo dei Fiori, rage will kindle at a poet's words.